The spotlight hit Caleb's face as his horse Thunder reared up in panic, sending him tumbling to the wooden stage floor, while 300 people erupted in cruel laughter. What they didn't know was that this humiliating moment would fuel the most incredible transformation anyone in Millbrook had ever witnessed. They couldn't have imagined that 6 months later, this same awkward teenager and his frightened horse would return to deliver a performance so breathtaking, so perfectly synchronized, that it would silence every critic and leave the entire town wondering how they had so badly misjudged what was possible when determination meets unwavering heart. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty arena behind the weathered barn, where 16-year-old Caleb Rivers spent most of his free time, brushing down his chestnut gelding with the kind of patient care that had become second nature over the past 3 years. Thunder was not the kind of horse that inspired confidence in strangers. His nervous energy and tendency to shy away from sudden movements had earned him a reputation as unpredictable among the other riders at Millbrook stables. But Caleb saw something different in the animal's dark eyes. Intelligence, mixed with a vulnerability that reminded him uncomfortably of his own struggles with social anxiety and the constant feeling of being an outsider in his small town. Caleb had never intended to become the target of his classmates' mockery, but his quiet demeanor and preference for spending time with horses rather than people had marked him as different in a community where conformity was valued above individual expression. His family's modest circumstances meant that he couldn't afford the expensive riding lessons that most of the other kids took for granted. Instead, learning through observation, trial and error, and countless hours of patient practice with Thunder, who had been rejected by several other riders before Caleb's gentle persistence had finally earned the horse's trust. The annual Millbrook Talent Show was one of the town's most significant social events, drawing participants and spectators from throughout the county for an evening of performances that ranged from polished musical numbers by the high school's star students to quirky comedy acts that rarely landed with the audience as intended. For most participants, the talent show represented an opportunity to showcase skills they had been developing for years, but for Caleb, it felt like something more desperate and necessary, a chance to prove that he and Thunder deserved the respect that had been consistently denied to them both. The idea had come to him during one of his solitary training sessions, watching Thunder respond to subtle cues and execute movements that most people would never associate with the skittish animal they thought they knew. Caleb had been working on a routine that combined basic dressage movements with more theatrical elements, creating a performance that would demonstrate the deep bond between horse and rider while showcasing Thunder's and hidden grace and intelligence. The routine was ambitious for someone with Caleb's limited formal training, but months of practice had convinced him that they were ready to surprise everyone who had dismissed them as an unlikely pair with nothing special to offer. The weeks leading up to the talent show had been filled with increasingly intense preparation, with Caleb spending every available moment refining their routine and working to build Thunder's confidence in performing before an audience. The horse's natural nervousness presented constant challenges, requiring Caleb to develop new techniques for calming and focusing his partner's attention, even when surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and distractions. Their practice sessions became a kind of meditation for both of them, creating a shared rhythm and understanding that transcended the usual relationship between rider and mount. But even as Caleb's confidence in their routine grew stronger, he couldn't escape the anxiety that came with knowing that failure would only reinforce the community's existing assumptions about his capabilities and worth. The other kids at school had already begun making jokes about his planned performance, spreading rumors about what kind of disaster they expected to witness when the quiet kid who talked to horses more than people finally tried to prove himself in public. The pressure was intensified by his awareness that this might be his only opportunity to change how people saw him, making the stakes feel impossibly high for what was supposed to be a simple talent show performance. On the evening of the performance, Caleb arrived at the community center 3 hours early, hoping to give Thunder time to acclimate to the environment and work through any nervousness before the audience began to arrive. The building was already bustling with activity, as volunteers set up chairs and tested sound equipment, creating a chaos of noise and movement that immediately put Thunder on edge. Caleb spent the extra time walking his horse around the perimeter of the building, speaking in the low, soothing tones that had always helped calm the animal's anxiety. But he could feel Thunder's tension increasing as more people arrived, and the general noise level continued to rise. The backstage area was cramped and poorly organized, with performers of all ages trying to prepare for their acts, while navigating around each other in the limited space. Caleb found himself wedged between a group of middle school dancers who were practicing their choreography and a local musician who was tuning his guitar with obsessive precision, creating an environment that felt chaotic and overwhelming for both him and Thunder. The horse's nervous energy was becoming increasingly difficult to manage, and Caleb realized that his careful preparation might not be enough to overcome the challenging conditions they were facing. When their turn finally arrived, Caleb led Thunder onto the stage with what he hoped appeared to be confidence, though his hands were shaking and his mouth felt dry with nervous anticipation. The stage lights were brighter than he had expected, creating harsh shadows and eliminating his ability to see the audience clearly, which somehow made their presence feel even more intimidating and judgmental. Thunder immediately began showing signs of distress, his ears flattening against his head, and his steps becoming increasingly erratic as he tried to process the unfamiliar environment and the overwhelming sensory input of lights, sounds, and the collective attention of 300 people. The routine began well enough, with Thunder responding to Caleb's cues and executing the opening movements with reasonable precision, despite his obvious nervousness. But as they moved into the more complex portions of their performance, the horse's anxiety began to overwhelm his training, causing him to miss cues and execute movements with the kind of hesitation and uncertainty that made the entire routine look amateurish and unprepared. Caleb tried to compensate by adjusting his signals and providing additional encouragement, but his own nervousness was beginning to affect his riding, creating a feedback loop of tension that both he and Thunder could feel building towards some kind of crisis. The disaster came during what should have been the routine's climactic moment, a series of controlled rears and prances that required perfect communication and trust between horse and rider. Instead of executing the movement with the grace and power they had achieved during practice, Thunder panicked completely, rearing wildly and striking out with his front hooves, while Caleb struggled to maintain control. The boy lost his balance and tumbled from the saddle, landing hard on the wooden stage floor, while Thunder continued to thrash and whinny in distress, creating exactly the kind of chaotic spectacle that everyone had been expecting and secretly hoping to witness. The audience's response was immediate and devastating, with laughter erupting from every section of the community center as people pointed and whispered about the failure they had just witnessed. Some audience members were clearly trying to contain their amusement out of basic politeness, but many others seemed to view the disaster as confirmation of their existing assumptions about Caleb's abilities and his foolish ambition to perform publicly with an obviously unsuitable horse. The sound of their laughter felt like a physical blow, drowning out the announcer's attempts to restore order and move on to the next act, while Caleb struggled to his feet and tried to calm Thunder enough to lead him off the stage. The walk back to the trailer felt endless, with every step accompanied by the awareness that his humiliation had been witnessed by virtually everyone who mattered in his small community. Thunder's continued agitation made the simple task of loading him into the trailer more difficult than usual, requiring several attempts and creating additional opportunities for anyone who might be watching to witness further evidence of Caleb's inadequacy as a horseman. The drive home was conducted in silence, with Caleb replaying every moment of the disaster while trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred and what it might mean for his future in a town where reputation mattered more than almost anything else. The aftermath of the talent show was even worse than Caleb had anticipated, with his humiliation becoming the subject of jokes and commentary throughout the school and the broader community. Videos of his fall had been captured on multiple phones and were already circulating on social media, accompanied by mocking captions and commentary that transformed his genuine effort into entertainment for people who had never attempted anything remotely as challenging as what he had tried to accomplish. The response reinforced every insecurity he had ever felt about his place in the community and his worth as both a person and a horseman, creating a level of shame and self-doubt that felt almost overwhelming. At school, The teasing was relentless but subtle, with classmates making horse-related jokes and references that were clearly directed at him, while maintaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid direct or recti confrontation. Teachers seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but uncertain about how to address it, occasionally offering awkward expressions of sympathy that only served to remind Caleb of his public failure and the impossibility of escaping its consequences. The cafeteria became a particularly challenging environment, with conversations stopping when he walked by and resuming with barely suppressed laughter once he had passed, creating a constant reminder of his altered status in the social hierarchy. The bullying extended beyond school into other areas of his life, with people at the grocery store and other public places making comments or giving him looks that made it clear his reputation had been permanently damaged by the talent show disaster. Even adults who should have known better seemed unable to resist making subtle references to his fall, treating it as a amusing anecdote rather than recognizing the genuine effort and courage that had been required for him to attempt the performance in the first place. The cumulative effect was to make Caleb feel isolated and exposed in ways that went far beyond normal teenage social anxiety, creating a situation where even routine activities became sources of stress, and humiliation. But perhaps the most painful aspect of the aftermath was the effect it seemed to have on Thunder, who had become increasingly withdrawn and skittish in the weeks following their disastrous performance. The horse seemed to sense Caleb's emotional state and was responding with his own form of anxiety and depression, refusing to eat regularly and showing little interest in their usual training activities. Their relationship, which had been the most positive and consistent element in Caleb's life, appeared to be suffering permanent damage from the trauma of their public failure, creating a spiral of guilt and self-blame that threatened to destroy the one thing that had given his life meaning and purpose. For several weeks, Caleb avoided the stables altogether, unable to face the prospect of confronting Thunder's changed behavior or the sympathetic but pitying looks from other riders who had witnessed his humiliation. He spent his free time alone in his room, trying to focus on schoolwork and other activities that might help him forget about his failed ambitions and the growing certainty that he would never be able to overcome the reputation he had created for himself. The isolation was self-imposed but felt inevitable, as if the community had collectively decided that he no longer deserved to participate in activities that might lead to further embarrassment or disappointment. The turning point came during a conversation with his grandfather, a retired rancher who had spent his entire life working with horses and had never offered unsolicited advice about Caleb's riding or his relationship with Thunder. Grandfather Rivers was known for his practical wisdom and his ability to see through surface appearances to understand the underlying truth of any situation. Qualities that had made him a respected figure in the community despite his tendency to avoid social gatherings and public attention. When he finally chose to address Caleb's situation, his words carried weight and authority that demanded serious consideration. "You know what I saw when I watched that video of your performance?" Grandfather Rivers asked during one of their rare private conversations. "I saw a boy who had the courage to try something difficult, and a horse who was scared but trusted his rider enough to attempt it anyway. Most people in that audience have never tried anything half as challenging as what you attempted, and they certainly haven't done it in front of 300 people who are expecting them to fail." Caleb felt a mixture of gratitude and skepticism at his grandfather's words, understanding the kindness behind them, but unable to ignore the reality of what had actually occurred during the talent show. "But we did fail, Grandpa. Everyone saw us fail, and now they think we're a joke. Failure is only permanent if you let it be," his grandfather replied with the kind of quiet certainty that came from decades of experience with setbacks and recoveries. "Every good horseman I've ever known has had moments like yours. Times when everything went wrong and they felt like giving up. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't isn't talent or luck, it's the willingness to get back up and try again, even when it feels impossible." The conversation continued for more than an hour, with Grandfather Rivers sharing stories from his own youth about embarrassing failures and hard-won recoveries that had ultimately led to his success as a businessman. His perspective helped Caleb begin to reframe his experience, not as a permanent defeat, but as a temporary setback that could potentially become the foundation for something better and more meaningful. The idea was initially difficult to accept, given the depth of his humiliation and the apparent permanence of his damaged reputation, but it offered an alternative to the hopelessness that had been consuming him for weeks. The decision to return to the stables and resume working with Thunder was not easy, requiring Caleb to overcome both his own emotional resistance and his fear of how others might react to his presence. When he finally made the walk to Thunder's stall, he found the horse in even worse condition than he had expected, with visible weight loss and a general air of depression that made it clear the animal had been affected by their separation as much as by their public failure. The reunion was initially awkward and tentative, with both horse and rider seeming uncertain about how to reconnect after weeks of mutual avoidance and self-imposed isolation. But as Caleb began the familiar routine of grooming and caring for Thunder, their natural partnership began to reassert itself, with the horse gradually relaxing and responding to the attention he had been missing. The simple act of brushing Thunder's coat and checking his hooves felt like a form of meditation, helping Caleb reconnect with the sense of purpose and belonging that had originally drawn him to horses and sustained him through previous challenges. By the end of that first session, both of them seemed to have remembered what they meant to each other and why their partnership had been worth developing in the first place. The process of rebuilding their confidence and skills was slow and methodical, with Caleb deliberately starting over with basic exercises and gradually working their way back toward more complex movements. He had learned from their previous experience that rushing toward ambitious goals without ensuring a solid foundation was a recipe for disaster, especially when working with a horse whose confidence had been as badly shaken as Thunder's. Each training session became an opportunity to strengthen their communication and trust, with progress measured in small improvements rather than dramatic breakthroughs that might prove unsustainable under pressure. As weeks turned into months, Caleb began to notice changes in both himself and Thunder that went beyond simply recovering their previous skill level. The humiliation of their public failure had forced him to examine his motivations and goals more honestly than ever before, leading to a deeper understanding of what he actually hoped to accomplish through his riding and his relationship with his horse. Instead of focusing primarily on impressing others or proving his worth to a skeptical community, he began to prioritize the intrinsic satisfaction that came from excellent horsemanship and the genuine partnership he was developing with Thunder. The horse's transformation was equally significant, with his natural nervousness gradually giving way to a kind of focused calm that Caleb had never seen before. Thunder seemed to understand that they were working towards something important, and his willingness to attempt challenging movements and trust Caleb's guidance reached levels that exceeded their previous best performances. Their training sessions became increasingly sophisticated, with subtle communication and seamless coordination that reflected hundreds of hours of patient practice and mutual understanding. Word of their improved performances began to circulate among the other riders at the stables, with people who had previously dismissed Caleb's abilities beginning to take notice of the obvious progress he and Thunder were making. The attention was initially unwelcome, reminding Caleb of the judgment and criticism that had followed their talent show disaster. But he gradually learned to accept the recognition as acknowledgement of genuine achievement rather than setup for future humiliation. The other riders' growing respect felt different from the superficial approval he had once sought, based on observed competence rather than social positioning or popularity. The suggestion that he and Thunder should consider performing again came from Sarah Chen, an experienced rider whose opinion Caleb had always respected and who had witnessed their improvement over the months of intensive training. Her proposal was initially met with immediate resistance, as Caleb felt certain that attempting another public performance would only lead to a repetition of their previous disaster and further damage to their hard-won progress. But Sarah's persistence and her genuine belief in their abilities gradually wore down his resistance, especially when she pointed out that their current skill level far exceeded what they had possessed during their first attempt. "You're not the same rider you were 6 months ago," Sarah told him during one of their conversations about his reluctance to perform again. "And Thunder isn't the same horse. You've both learned from what happened, and you've put in the work to become genuinely excellent at what you do. Hiding that talent because you're afraid of what people might think is a waste, and it's not fair to either of you." The debate continued for several weeks, with Caleb finding himself torn between his desire to showcase what he and Thunder had accomplished, and his fear of experiencing another public humiliation that might undo all their progress. The decision was ultimately made when he learned that the annual Millbrook Talent Show was accepting applications for the following year's event, creating a natural opportunity to either prove that their previous failure had been an aberration or confirm that they were genuinely not suited for public performance. The symbolism of returning to the same venue where they had experienced their greatest humiliation felt both appropriate and terrifying. The application process required Caleb to submit a detailed description of his planned performance, along with video evidence of his current skill level, creating an opportunity for the show's organizers to screen out acts that might not be suitable for their audience. The video he submitted showed him and Thunder executing a routine that was more complex and ambitious than anything they had attempted before, demonstrating the kind of precision and artistry that typically required years of professional training to achieve. The response was positive and somewhat surprising, with the organizers expressing genuine enthusiasm for his participation and assuring him that they expected his performance to be one of the show's highlights. The months of preparation that followed were unlike anything Caleb had experienced before, with every training session focused on perfecting not just individual movements, but the overall flow and emotional impact of their routine. He had learned to think about their performance as a form of storytelling, with each element designed to communicate something specific about the relationship between horse and rider, and the trust that made their partnership possible. The routine they developed was technically challenging, but also deeply personal, reflecting the journey they had taken together and the growth that had emerged from their shared experience of failure and recovery. Thunder's preparation was equally intensive, with Caleb working to ensure that the horse would be able to perform confidently regardless of environmental distractions or unexpected challenges. They practiced in different locations and under various conditions, gradually building Thunder's ability to maintain focus and execute complex movements, even when surrounded by unfamiliar sights and sounds. The horse's natural intelligence and his deep trust in Caleb allowed him to adapt to new situations with increasing confidence, suggesting that he would be able to handle the pressure of performing before a large audience. As the date of the talent show approached, Caleb found himself experiencing a completely different kind of nervousness than he had felt before their first performance. Instead of the anxiety that came from uncertainty about their abilities, he felt the anticipation that accompanied knowing they were genuinely prepared to deliver something exceptional. Their routine had been refined through countless repetitions, and both horse and rider understood exactly what was expected of them, and how to achieve it even under challenging conditions. The community's reaction to news of Caleb's planned return to the talent show was mixed, with some people expressing genuine curiosity about whether he had learned from his previous experience, while others seemed to be anticipating another entertaining disaster. The social media buzz surrounding his participation included both supportive comments from people who admired his persistence and mocking predictions from those who assumed he was setting himself up for another humiliating failure. The attention was intense, but felt different from the judgment he had experienced after their first performance. Perhaps because he now had confidence in his and Thunder's abilities that was based on demonstrated competence rather than hopeful ambition. On the evening of the performance, Caleb arrived at the community center with the kind of calm focus that came from thorough preparation and genuine confidence in what they were about to attempt. Thunder seemed to sense his rider's emotional state and appeared more relaxed than he had been during their previous visit to the venue, responding to familiar cues and showing little sign of the anxiety that had contributed to their earlier disaster. The backstage environment was just as chaotic as Caleb remembered, but this time he was prepared for the distractions and had developed strategies for keeping Thunder calm and focused despite the surrounding commotion. When their turn arrived, Caleb led Thunder onto the stage with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of achieving. The stage lights were just as bright as he remembered, but instead of feeling blinded and disoriented, he found them helpful in creating the dramatic atmosphere that would enhance their performance. Thunder's response to the environment was completely different from their first attempt, with the horse stepping onto the stage with alert curiosity rather than fearful resistance. already beginning to focus on Caleb's signals and prepare for the routine they had practiced so many times. The opening movements of their routine were executed with the kind of precision and grace that immediately captured the audience's attention, demonstrating a level of skill and partnership that few people had expected to see from the pair who had failed so dramatically months earlier. Thunder's natural elegance was finally able to shine through, with his movements flowing seamlessly from one element to the next, while maintaining perfect responsiveness to Caleb's subtle cues. The transformation was so complete that many audience members began to question whether they were watching the same horse and rider who had provided such entertainment during the previous year's show. As the routine progressed through its more complex elements, the quality of their performance continued to exceed everyone's expectations, with horse and rider demonstrating the kind of communication and trust that, quote, typically took years to develop. Thunder's execution of challenging movements was flawless, showing none of the hesitation or uncertainty that had characterized their previous attempt, while Caleb's riding displayed a maturity and confidence that reflected the intensive training and personal growth he had undergone. The audience's initial murmurs of surprise gradually gave way to absorbed silence as people realized they were witnessing something genuinely exceptional. The climactic moment of their routine, the same series of controlled rears and prances that had led to disaster during their first performance, was executed with breathtaking precision and power. Thunder rose on his hind legs with perfect balance and control, his front hooves striking the air in a display of strength and grace that drew gasps of admiration from the audience. Caleb remained perfectly positioned throughout the movement, his seat secure and his signals clear, demonstrating the kind of horsemanship that most people associated with professional performers rather than local teenagers. The movement was repeated several times with identical precision, creating a moment of pure artistry that left the audience stunned. The routine concluded with a series of flowing movements that showcased both the horse's natural athleticism and the rider's ability to guide and enhance those qualities, creating a performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally moving. As they came to their final position, with Thunder standing perfectly still while Caleb acknowledged the audience, the silence stretched for several seconds, before erupting into the kind of sustained applause that was rarely heard at local talent shows. People rose to their feet throughout the community center, their appreciation genuine and enthusiastic as they recognized the exceptional quality of what they had just witnessed. The standing ovation continued for several minutes, with audience members calling out congratulations and expressions of amazement at the transformation they had witnessed. Many of the same people who had laughed at Caleb's previous failure were now cheering his success, their mockery replaced by genuine respect for what he and Thunder had accomplished through months of dedicated work and mutual commitment. The response was overwhelming and deeply satisfying, representing not just recognition of their current abilities, but acknowledgement of the journey they had taken to reach this level of excellence. As Caleb led Thunder off the stage, he felt a sense of completion and vindication that went far beyond simple satisfaction with their performance. They had proven to themselves and their community that their previous failure had been a temporary setback rather than a reflection of their true potential, and they had done so through the kind of dedicated effort and perseverance that earned lasting respect rather than momentary applause. The experience had taught both of them valuable lessons about resilience, preparation, and the importance of believing in their abilities even when others doubted them. The aftermath of their successful performance was as dramatically different from their previous experience as their actual routine had been from their earlier disaster. Instead of mockery and social isolation, Caleb found himself receiving congratulations and expressions of admiration from classmates and community members who had previously dismissed his abilities. The transformation in how people treated him was remarkable and gratifying, though he had learned enough about the fickleness of public opinion to not take it too seriously or allow it to define his sense of self-worth. Thunder's response to their success was perhaps even more meaningful than the audience's reaction, with the horse displaying a confidence and contentment that reflected his awareness of what they had accomplished together. Their partnership had been tested by failure and strengthened by the work required to overcome it, creating a bond that was deeper and more resilient than what they had possessed before their initial disaster. The experience had taught them both that true success was measured not by avoiding failure, but by the willingness to learn from setbacks and continue working toward their goals, despite temporary disappointments. In the weeks and months that followed their triumphant return to the talent show stage, Caleb and Thunder continued to refine their skills and explore new challenges, with their success opening doors to opportunities that had previously seemed impossible. They were invited to perform at other events throughout the region, and Caleb began receiving inquiries about providing riding instruction to other young people who were inspired by his example. The recognition was gratifying, but more importantly, it provided validation for the approach to horsemanship and personal development that had emerged from their shared experience of failure and recovery. The story of their transformation became a source of inspiration for other young people in the community who were dealing with their own challenges and setbacks, demonstrating that persistence and dedication could overcome even the most humiliating failures. Caleb found himself serving as an informal mentor to kids who were struggling with bullying, social anxiety, or other obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Sharing the lessons he had learned about the importance of continuing to work toward their goals, regardless of what others might think or say. Looking back on their journey from disaster to triumph, Caleb realized that their initial failure had been necessary for them to achieve the success they ultimately found. The humiliation had forced them both to examine their limitations honestly and commit to the kind of intensive improvement that they might never have pursued if their first performance had been merely adequate rather than spectacularly unsuccessful. Their story had become proof that the most meaningful achievements often emerged from the willingness to risk failure and learn from the experience, regardless of how painful that process might initially seem. The success of their second performance opened doors that Caleb had never imagined possible, beginning with an invitation to perform at the county fair's equestrian exhibition, an event that typically featured only professional riders and established training facilities. The invitation came from Margaret Holloway, a former Olympic equestrian who now served as a judge for regional competitions and had been in the audience during Caleb's triumphant return to the talent show stage. Her offer represented validation from someone whose opinion carried significant weight in the horse community, suggesting that what Caleb and Thunder had accomplished transcended local entertainment and approached genuine artistry. "I've been watching riders for 40 years, Margaret told Caleb during their first meeting at her pristine training facility. "And I can recognize authentic partnership when I see it. What you and your horse demonstrated wasn't just technical skill. It was the kind of communication that most riders spend decades trying to develop. You have something special, and it would be a shame to waste it." The conversation that followed was unlike any discussion about riding that Caleb had ever experienced, with Margaret asking detailed questions about his training methods, his philosophy of horsemanship, and his long-term goals for his partnership with Thunder. Her interest was both flattering and slightly overwhelming, as she spoke about opportunities and possibilities that seemed far beyond what a teenager from Millbrook should reasonably expect to achieve. But her genuine enthusiasm and her obvious expertise made it impossible to dismiss her suggestions as unrealistic fantasy. Margaret's facility was a revelation for Caleb, representing the kind of professional environment that he had only seen in magazines and online videos. The indoor arena was larger than the entire community center where he had performed, with perfect footing, professional lighting, and an observation area that allowed instructors and students to analyze riding techniques with scientific precision. The horses in training were obviously valuable animals, their breeding and conditioning reflecting the kind of investment that Caleb's family could never have afforded. Yet Margaret seemed genuinely interested in working with him, despite his modest circumstances. "Natural talent is more valuable than expensive breeding," Margaret explained as she watched Caleb work Thunder through some basic exercises in her arena. "I've seen riders with million-dollar horses who never develop the kind of feel and timing that you've already demonstrated. Money can buy good horses and professional instruction, but it can't buy the intuitive understanding that makes great horsemen." The training sessions that followed were intensive and sometimes humbling, as Margaret identified areas for improvement that Caleb hadn't even recognized as weaknesses. Her instruction was precise and demanding, requiring him to think about riding in ways that went far beyond the practical skills he had developed through years of trial and error. She introduced concepts of biomechanics, horse psychology, and performance theory that transformed his understanding of what was possible when rider and horse worked together at the highest levels. Thunder's response to the professional training environment was remarkable, with the horse seeming to understand that he was being asked to perform at a higher standard than ever before. His natural intelligence and sensitivity, qualities that had sometimes made him difficult for less experienced riders to handle, became advantages in the sophisticated training program that Margaret designed to cry, specifically for their partnership. The horse's improvement was rapid and dramatic, with his movements becoming more refined, and his responsiveness to Caleb's cues reaching levels that approached telepathic communication. The county fair performance was scheduled for the final evening of the week-long event, positioned as the climactic presentation that would showcase the region's finest equestrian talent. Caleb found himself listed alongside riders who had competed at national levels and trained with internationally recognized instructors, a situation that would have been intimidating 6 months earlier, but now felt like an appropriate recognition of what he and Thunder had accomplished. The pressure was significant, but it was the kind of challenge that tested their abilities rather than exceeding them. The weeks of preparation under Margaret's guidance had transformed not just their technical skills, but their entire approach to performance, with every element of their routine refined to create maximum impact while maintaining the authentic partnership that had made their talent show performance so memorable. They developed new movements that showcased Thunder's natural athleticism while demonstrating Caleb's growing sophistication as a rider, creating a performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally compelling. The fair's equestrian exhibition drew crowds that were significantly larger and more knowledgeable than anything Caleb had previously encountered, including professional trainers, serious competitors, and knowledgeable enthusiasts who could recognize quality when they saw it. The audience's expectations were correspondingly higher, making this performance a genuine test of whether their local success could translate to recognition at more competitive levels. The stakes felt different from their talent show appearance, less about proving themselves to skeptical neighbors and more about demonstrating that they belonged among serious equestrian performers. When their turn came, Caleb and Thunder entered the arena with the calm confidence that had become their trademark, immediately capturing the audience's attention with their obvious preparation and professional presentation. The routine they performed was a masterpiece of choreography and execution, combining classical dressage movements with more theatrical elements that showcased both the horse's natural grace and the rider's ability to enhance and direct those qualities. Every transition was seamless, every movement precise, creating a performance that elevated horse and rider into something approaching art. The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming, with sustained applause that continued long after they had completed their final bow. Margaret's congratulations were particularly meaningful, as she had seen countless performances at much higher levels and could provide authoritative assessment of their achievement. "That was professional quality work," she told Caleb as they left the arena. "You've proven that you can compete with anyone, regardless of their background or resources." The success at the county fair led to additional opportunities that gradually expanded Caleb's understanding of what might be possible for someone with his abilities and dedication. He was invited to participate in regional competitions, to demonstrate techniques at riding clinics, and to work with other young riders who were seeking to develop their own partnerships with difficult or challenging horses. Each new experience broadened his perspective and strengthened his confidence, while also reinforcing the lessons about preparation, persistence, and authentic partnership that had emerged from his early failures. The transformation in how his community viewed him was perhaps the most personally satisfying aspect of his success, with former critics becoming genuine supporters and people who had once dismissed him now seeking his advice about their own horses and riding challenges. The bullying that had followed his talent show disaster was replaced by respect and admiration, though Caleb had learned enough about the fickleness of public opinion to not let external validation become too important to Burrell. His sense of self-worth, the real satisfaction, came from knowing that he and Thunder had developed into something genuinely excellent, regardless of what others thought or said about their achievements. Thunder's development had been equally remarkable, with the nervous, unpredictable horse evolving into an animal that was sought after for demonstrations and exhibitions throughout the region. His natural sensitivity, which had once been seen as a liability, was now recognized as an asset that allowed him to respond to subtle cues and perform with the kind of precision that less sensitive horses could never achieve. The transformation had required patience, understanding, and countless hours of careful training. But the results validated every moment of effort that Caleb had invested in their partnership. The decision to compete at the state level came after months of encouragement from Margaret and other professionals who had witnessed their performances. Though Caleb initially resisted the suggestion because he felt that formal competition might compromise the artistic and personal elements that made their partnership special. State-level competition involved judges, scores, and rankings that reduced performance to measurable criteria, potentially losing the emotional connection and storytelling aspects that had made their local success so meaningful. But Margaret convinced him that competing would provide valuable experience and exposure that could open doors to even greater opportunities. Competition doesn't have to change who you are or what you're trying to accomplish, Margaret explained during one of their training sessions. The best competitors find ways to maintain their authenticity while meeting the technical requirements the judges are looking for. You and Thunder have something special, and competition can be a way to share that with a wider audience rather than compromising it. The preparation for state competition was more intensive than anything Caleb had previously experienced, requiring them to master specific movements and sequences that were evaluated according to established criteria rather than general artistic impression. The training was challenging because it required them to maintain their natural partnership and communication while also meeting standardized expectations that didn't always align with their instinctive approaches. But the discipline of formal training also pushed them to achieve levels of precision and consistency that they might never have reached through less structured practice. Thunder's adaptation to competitive requirements was remarkable, with the horse seeming to understand that they were working towards something important that required his absolute best effort. His natural intelligence allowed him to master complex sequences quickly, while his deep trust in Caleb enabled him to perform demanding movements with confidence even under the pressure of formal evaluation. The partnership that had emerged from their shared experience of failure and recovery proved to be perfectly suited for the mental and physical challenges of serious competition. The state competition was held at a prestigious facility that regularly hosted national and international events, exposing Caleb to a level of professionalism and competition that exceeded anything he had previously encountered. The other competitors included riders who had been training since childhood with top-level instructors, riding horses worth more than most people's houses, and backed by resources that made Caleb's modest circumstances seem almost ridiculous by comparison. But he had learned that success in riding was ultimately about the quality of communication between horse and rider rather than the expense of equipment or training, giving him confidence that he and Thunder could compete with anyone. Their performance at the state competition was flawless, with Thunder executing every movement with the precision and grace that had become their signature while Caleb demonstrated the kind of subtle, effective riding the judges recognized as the mark of genuine horsemanship. The routine they performed combined technical excellence with artistic expression, creating a presentation that satisfied the formal requirements of competition while maintaining the authentic partnership that made their work distinctive. The judges' scores reflected their achievement, placing them among the top finishers despite their relative inexperience at this level of competition. The recognition at state level led to invitations to compete nationally, opportunities that would have been unimaginable for a teenager from a small town just 2 years after his humiliating failure at a local talent show. The transformation seemed almost impossible to believe, yet it had been achieved through the kind of dedicated work and unwavering commitment that made success feel both surprising and inevitable. Caleb had learned that extraordinary achievement was possible for anyone willing to persist through failure and maintain focus on continuous improvement rather than external validation. The national competition circuit was a revelation, exposing Caleb to riding traditions, training methods, and competitive philosophies from throughout the country. He met riders who had developed their skills in different regions and cultural contexts, learning that there were many ways to achieve excellence in horsemanship, while also discovering that the fundamental principles of trust, communication, and mutual respect were universal among successful partnerships. The diversity of approaches was educational and inspiring, broadening his understanding of what was possible, while reinforcing his confidence in the methods that had worked for him and Thunder. Thunder's performance at national events was consistently excellent, with the horse seeming to thrive on the challenge and excitement of competing against the country's best riders and horses. His natural athleticism and intelligence were perfectly suited for high-level competition, while his deep bond with Caleb gave them an advantage that couldn't be bought or taught through conventional instruction. Their success at national level validated everything they had learned about the importance of authentic partnership and proved that their small-town origins were no barrier to achieving excellence in their chosen discipline. The media attention that accompanied their national success was both gratifying and overwhelming, with their story of overcoming failure to achieve excellence resonating with audiences far beyond the equestrian community. They were featured in horse magazines, local newspapers, and eventually national publications that were interested in their journey from public humiliation to competitive success. The attention was flattering, but also created pressure to maintain their success and continue achieving at levels that satisfied public expectations. Caleb's relationship with fame was complicated, as he appreciated the recognition of their achievements while also feeling protective of the privacy and authenticity that had made their partnership special. He learned to be selective about interviews and public appearances, participating in opportunities that seemed likely to inspire other young riders, while avoiding situations that might exploit their story for entertainment value. The balance was difficult to maintain, but it was essential for preserving the qualities that had made their success meaningful in the first place. The establishment of a training program at Margaret's facility was a natural extension of Caleb's success, providing him with an opportunity to share what he had learned while also developing his skills as an instructor and mentor. The students who came to work with him were typically young riders who were struggling with difficult horses or seeking to develop the kind of authentic partnership that had made his success possible. Teaching forced him to articulate and systematize the intuitive understanding that had guided his work with Thunder, creating a more complete understanding of his own methods and philosophy. Thunder's role in the training program was equally important, as his sensitivity and intelligence made him an ideal teacher for riders who needed to develop better communication skills and more subtle approaches to horsemanship. The horse seemed to understand his educational role and adjusted his responses to provide appropriate challenges for students at different skill levels, demonstrating patience with beginners while demanding an excellence from more advanced riders. His contribution to the program was as valuable as Caleb's instruction, proving that great horses could be teachers as well as performers. The success of their training program led to opportunities to work with problem horses throughout the region, animals that had been written off by other trainers as too difficult or dangerous to handle safely. Caleb's approach, which emphasized understanding and communication over dominance and control, proved remarkably effective with horses that had been traumatized or mishandled by previous owners. His reputation for rehabilitating difficult animals grew rapidly, creating demand for his services that exceeded his ability to accommodate every request. Each problem horse presented unique challenges that required Caleb to adapt his methods and develop new approaches to communication and trust building, expanding his understanding of equine psychology and behavior while also testing his patience and creativity. The work was sometimes dangerous and always demanding, but it was also deeply satisfying because it represented the practical application of everything he had learned about the importance of authentic relationships and mutual respect between humans and animals. The stories of successful rehabilitation were often as dramatic as his own journey from failure to success, with horses that had been considered hopeless cases developing into reliable, willing partners under his patient guidance. These transformations reinforced his belief that most behavioral problems were the result of miscommunication or inappropriate training rather than inherent defects in the animals themselves, validating his approach while also providing compelling evidence for the effectiveness of his methods. The decision to write a book about his experiences was initially reluctant, as Caleb felt that his story was still unfolding and that he might not have enough perspective to offer meaningful guidance to others. But the encouragement of Margaret, his publisher, and the many young riders who had been inspired by his example eventually convinced him that sharing his journey could help others who were facing their own challenges, setbacks, The writing process forced him to reflect deeply on everything he had learned and experienced, crystallizing insights that had been developing gradually over years of training and competition. The book, titled Second Chances: A Boy, His Horse, and the Courage to Try Again, became a bestseller within the equestrian community and found readership among people who had never been on a horse, but were inspired by the universal themes of perseverance, growth, and the power of authentic skill. Relationships. The success of the book led to speaking engagements at schools, riding clubs, and youth organizations, providing Caleb with platforms to share his message about the importance of learning from failure and never giving up on dreams that seemed impossible to achieve. Thunder's continued development as both a competitive horse and a teaching animal was perhaps the most rewarding aspect of their ongoing partnership, with the horse maintaining his excellence while also seeming to enjoy the variety and challenge of their expanded activities. His intelligence and sensitivity continued to amaze everyone who worked with him, while his bond with Caleb remained as strong as ever, despite all the changes and opportunities that success had brought into their lives. The establishment of a scholarship program for young riders from modest circumstances was a natural extension of Caleb's commitment to making equestrian opportunities available to people regardless of their economic situation. The program, funded by his competition winnings, book royalties, and donations from supporters, provided equipment, instruction, and competition opportunities for talented young riders who might otherwise never have the chance to develop their abilities. The scholarships were awarded based on dedication and potential rather than current skill level, reflecting Caleb's belief that excellence could emerge from unexpected places when given appropriate support. The impact of the scholarship program extended far beyond individual recipients, creating a network of young riders who shared Caleb's values and approach to horsemanship while also developing their own unique styles and specializations. Many of the scholarship recipients went on to achieve success at regional and national levels, proving that the program was identifying and nurturing genuine talent while also validating Caleb's belief in the importance of providing opportunities for deserving young people. Looking back on the years since his humiliating failure at the local talent show, Caleb often marveled at how completely his life had been transformed by the decision to persist despite public mockery and personal discouragement. The journey from laughingstock to nationally recognized horseman seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet every step had been the logical result of dedication, hard work, and the willingness to learn from setbacks rather than being defeated by them. His story had become proof that extraordinary achievement was possible for anyone willing to commit to excellence, regardless of their starting point or the obstacles they faced. Thunder's role in that transformation was immeasurable, with the horse serving not just as a partner, but as a teacher, motivator, and friend who had shared every moment of their incredible journey. The bond between them had deepened and evolved over the years, transcending the typical relationship between rider and horse to become something approaching true partnership in every sense of the word. Their success belonged to both of them equally, representing the achievement that was possible when trust, communication, and mutual commitment combined with natural talent and dedicated effort. The legacy they were creating extended beyond their own achievements to influence how people thought about failure, recovery, and the potential for transformation that existed within everyone who was willing to persist. Through difficult times, their story had inspired countless young people to pursue their own dreams despite obstacles and setbacks, proving that success was ultimately determined by character and commitment rather than circumstances or initial advantages. As Caleb stood in the arena where he and Thunder continued to train and teach, watching new students work with their own horses and develop their own partnerships, he felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this point. The humiliation that had once seemed like the end of his dreams had actually been the beginning of achievements that exceeded anything he could have imagined, proving that failure was only permanent for those who chose to let it define them rather than learning from it and growing stronger. The arrival of documentary filmmakers at the training facility marked another milestone in their continuing evolution from local curiosity to national inspiration. The production company had been following stories of resilience and transformation across America, and Caleb's journey from public humiliation to equestrian excellence had captured their attention as a perfect example of the human capacity for growth and redemption. The director, Rachel Morrison, was particularly interested in exploring how the relationship between Caleb and Thunder had served as the foundation for everything else they had accomplished. "What we want to capture isn't just your success," Rachel explained during their initial meeting, "but the process of transformation that made that success possible. We're interested in the daily work, the small victories, the moments of doubt, and the relationship that sustained you through all of it. Your story represents something universal about the human experience, and we think it could inspire people who are facing their own challenges and setbacks." The filming process extended over several months, with Rachel and her crew documenting not just Caleb's current activities, but also returning to Millbrook to interview the people who had witnessed his original birth, failure, and subsequent transformation. The contrast between past and present perspectives was striking, with many community members expressing amazement at how completely their understanding of Caleb had changed over the years. Former classmates who had once mocked his ambitions now spoke with genuine admiration about his achievements and the inspiration his story had provided for their own children. The documentary crew spent considerable time filming Thunder as well, recognizing that the horse's transformation was equally remarkable and central to understanding the partnership that had made everything else possible. Thunder's calm confidence in front of cameras and his obvious enjoyment of performing for audiences demonstrated how completely he had overcome the anxiety and fearfulness that had characterized his early years. The horse had become a natural entertainer, seeming to understand that he was sharing something important and meaningful with the people who watched him work. One of the most powerful segments of the documentary featured Caleb working with a young girl named Emma, whose horse had been written off as untrainable by several previous instructors. The parallel between Emma's situation and Caleb's own early experiences with Thunder was obvious, but what made the story compelling was watching how Caleb's patient, understanding approach gradually transformed both the girl's confidence and her horse's behavior. The breakthrough moment, when Emma's horse finally responded to her gentle guidance with trust rather than resistance, provided a perfect illustration of the principles that had guided Caleb's entire philosophy: horsemanship. "Every horse has the potential to be excellent," Caleb explained to the camera while working with Emma and her previously difficult mare. "The key is learning to communicate in ways that make sense to them, building trust instead of demanding obedience, and being patient enough to let the relationship develop naturally. Most behavior problems are really communication problems, and they can be solved if you're willing to put in the time and effort to understand what the horse is trying to tell you." End quote. The documentary also explored the broader impact of Caleb's success on the Millbrook community, showing how his transformation had influenced local attitudes about young people, perseverance, and the importance of supporting rather than mocking those who dared to attempt difficult things. The community center, where he had experienced his original humiliation, had installed a plaque commemorating his achievements, and the annual talent show now included a special award named in his honor for participants who demonstrated exceptional courage and determination, regardless of their performance results. The film's premiere at the Sundance Film Festival was a surreal experience for Caleb, who found himself walking red carpets and giving interviews to entertainment reporters who were fascinated by his unlikely journey from small-town failure to national inspiration. The attention was both gratifying and overwhelming, requiring him to develop new skills for managing public appearances while maintaining the authenticity and humility that had always characterized his approach to success. Thunder, who accompanied him to several promotional events, handled the spotlight with typical grace, charming audiences and interviewers with his obvious intelligence and calm demeanor. The documentary's success led to a distribution deal that brought Caleb's story to audiences around the world, with particularly strong responses in countries where equestrian sports were popular and where his message about overcoming setbacks resonated with cultural values. The international attention resulted in invitations to visit training facilities in Europe, Australia, and South America, providing opportunities to learn from different traditions of horsemanship, while also sharing his own methods and philosophy with riders from diverse backgrounds. During a particularly memorable trip to Ireland, Caleb and Thunder worked with young riders who were struggling with horses that had been traumatized by harsh training methods. The cultural differences in approach to horse training were fascinating, but the universal principles of patience, understanding, and authentic communication proved just as effective in the Irish countryside as they had in Millbrook. The week-long clinic concluded with a demonstration performance that showcased not just Caleb and Thunder's abilities, but also the remarkable progress made by the local riders who had embraced his teaching methods. "What you've shown us isn't just about riding," said Seamus O'Brien, a veteran Irish trainer who had initially been skeptical of Caleb's unconventional methods. "It's about approaching any relationship with respect and patience, whether it's with horses, people, or life itself. Your horse Thunder isn't just well-trained, he's genuinely happy, and that happiness is contagious. It makes everyone around him want to be better." The international experiences reinforced Caleb's understanding that excellence in horsemanship transcended cultural boundaries and traditional methods, while also exposing him to techniques and perspectives that enriched his own understanding of what was possible in human-animal partnerships. Each new experience added layers to his knowledge and capability, while also providing fresh inspiration for the ongoing development of his training programs and educational initiatives. The decision to expand their training facility came after years of discussion with Margaret and other advisors who recognized that demand for Caleb's services far exceeded what could be accommodated in their current setup. The new facility would be designed specifically to support his philosophy of horsemanship, with features that prioritize the comfort and well-being of both horses and riders, while also providing state-of-the-art resources for instruction and rehabilitation. The project represented a significant financial investment, but it also offered the opportunity to create a lasting institution that could continue their work for generations to come. Thunder's role in planning the new facility was surprisingly significant, as Caleb had learned to observe his horse's preferences and responses to different environments as a guide for creating spaces that would be optimal for training and rehabilitation. The horse's sensitivity to environmental factors that humans might overlook had proven invaluable in identifying design elements that could make the difference between success and failure in working with difficult or traumatized animals. The new facility incorporated features that reflected years of accumulated wisdom about what horses needed to feel safe, comfortable, and ready to learn. The groundbreaking ceremony for the new facility was attended by hundreds of people from the equestrian community, local officials, and families whose lives had been touched by Caleb's work and inspiration. Margaret served as the keynote speaker, reflecting on the journey that had brought them from a chance encounter at a local talent show to the establishment of a world-class training facility dedicated to the principles they had developed together. Her remarks emphasized the importance of believing in potential, even when others saw only problems, and the transformative power of authentic relationships built on trust and mutual respect. What Caleb and Thunder have accomplished together represents the best of what's possible when talent meets opportunity and determination, Margaret told the assembled crowd. But more importantly, they've shown us that excellence isn't about perfection, it's about the willingness to learn from failure and keep growing. This facility will be a place where that philosophy is lived and taught, where young riders learn that success is measured not by the absence of setbacks, but by the courage to overcome them. The construction of the new facility provided opportunities for Caleb to work with architects, engineers, and specialized contractors who were designing spaces that would serve the unique needs of his program. Every detail was considered from the perspective of both human and equine users, resulting in innovations that other facilities began to adopt as word spread about the thoughtful design and functional excellence of the SECRA project. The process was educational for everyone involved, demonstrating how deep understanding of user needs could lead to solutions that exceeded conventional expectations. Thunder's adjustment to the new facility was seamless, with the horse seeming to understand that this was a place designed specifically for the kind of work they did together. His obvious comfort and enthusiasm in the new environment provided validation for the design choices that had guided the project, while also serving as an inspiration for the horses and riders who would use the BRAT facility in the future. The horse had become not just a partner in performance, but a consultant in creating optimal conditions for equestrian education and development. The opening of the new facility coincided with the launch of an online education platform that would make Caleb's teaching methods available to riders around the world who couldn't attend in-person training sessions. The digital platform included video lessons, interactive exercises, and virtual consultations that provided personalized guidance for riders working with their own horses. The technology allowed Caleb to reach students in remote locations, while also creating a resource that could be accessed by anyone seeking to improve their horsemanship, regardless of their geographic location or economic circumstances. The online platform's success exceeded all expectations, with students from 6 continents enrolling in courses and participating in virtual training sessions. The diversity of backgrounds and experiences among online students enriched the learning environment for everyone, as riders shared their own cultural approaches to horsemanship while learning from Caleb's methods and rider philosophy. The global community that developed around the platform demonstrated the universal appeal of approaches based on understanding, patience, and authentic communication. Thunder's adaptation to being filmed for online content was remarkable, with the horse seeming to understand that his demonstrations were being shared with audiences he would never meet in person. His performances for the cameras were consistently excellent, displaying the kind of focus and precision that made him an ideal teaching partner for students who are learning through digital media. The horse's natural charisma and obvious enjoyment of performing made the online content engaging and inspiring for viewers who might otherwise have found video instruction boring or impersonal. The development of specialized programs for military veterans was one of the most personally meaningful aspects of Caleb's expanded work, as he had always been moved by stories of service members who were struggling with trauma and readjustment challenges. The therapeutic value of working with horses was well established, but Caleb's approach emphasized the development of genuine partnerships that could provide lasting support and companionship rather than simply temporary relief from symptoms. The program paired veterans with horses that had their own histories of trauma or difficulty, creating relationships that were based on mutual understanding and shared experience. The success of the Veterans Program led to recognition from government agencies and nonprofit organizations that were seeking effective approaches to supporting military personnel who were dealing with post-service challenges. The program's emphasis on empowerment rather than treatment, and on building lasting relationships rather than providing temporary interventions, aligned with emerging best practices in veteran support services. The recognition brought additional funding and resources that allowed the program to expand beyond what Caleb could have supported through his own facility alone. Thunder's work with veterans was particularly powerful, as the horse's own history of overcoming anxiety and fear made him an ideal partner for people who were dealing with similar challenges. His calm, patient demeanor and obvious intelligence allowed him to respond appropriately to each veteran's individual needs and emotional state, providing exactly the right level of challenge and support to promote healing and growth. The horse had become a therapist in his own right, using his natural sensitivity and trained responsiveness to help people who were struggling with invisible wounds. The establishment of research partnerships with universities studying animal-assisted therapy and human-animal bonding provided opportunities to document and validate the methods that Caleb had developed through years of practical experience. The academic research added scientific credibility to approaches that had evolved through intuition and observation, while also identifying principles that could be applied to other therapeutic contexts. The collaboration between practical experience and academic research created a powerful foundation for understanding why Caleb's methods were effective and how they could be improved and expanded. The research findings confirmed what Caleb had always believed about the importance of authentic relationships in healing and growth, while also revealing neurological and psychological mechanisms that explained why his approach was particularly effective with both horses and humans who had experienced trauma or setbacks. The scientific validation was gratifying, but more importantly, it provided tools for training other instructors and therapists who wanted to incorporate similar methods into their own work. As Caleb reflected on the decade that had passed since his humiliating failure at the local talent show, he was amazed by the complex web of relationships, opportunities, and achievements that had grown from that single moment of public embarrassment. The boy who had fallen from his horse in front of a laughing audience had become an internationally recognized horseman, author, educator, and advocate whose work was touching lives around the world. But perhaps more importantly, he had learned that success was not about avoiding failure, but about transforming setbacks into stepping stones towards something better and more meaningful. Thunder, now a seasoned performer and teacher, whose reputation extended far beyond their original community, remained the constant center of everything Caleb had accomplished. The horse's journey from anxious, unpredictable animal to confident, capable partner paralleled Caleb's own transformation, while also serving as proof that potential existed in places where others saw only problems. Their partnership had become a living demonstration of what was possible when commitment, patience, and genuine care were applied to relationships that others might have dismissed as hopeless. The legacy they were creating extended far beyond their own achievements to influence how people thought about failure, recovery, and the transformative power of authentic relationships. Their story had inspired thousands of young people to pursue their dreams, despite obstacles and setbacks, while also providing practical tools and methods that made success more attainable for those who were willing to put in the necessary work. The ripple effects of their journey continued to expand, touching lives and communities in ways that neither of them could have imagined when they first began working together in the dusty arena behind the old barn. Looking toward the future, Caleb felt excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead, rather than satisfaction with what had already been accomplished. The new facility was just beginning to reach its potential. The online education platform was expanding into new areas and serving new populations, and the research partnerships were generating insights that could benefit countless other practitioners and students. Most importantly, the principles they had discovered and refined continued to prove their value in new contexts and applications, suggesting that their work was part of something larger and more enduring than, quote, individual success or recognition. Thunder, now approaching the age when most performance horses begin to slow down, showed no signs of losing his enthusiasm for the work they did together or his remarkable ability to inspire and teach others. The horse had become a living legend in the equestrian community, but more importantly, he remained Caleb's trusted partner and friend, the constant presence who had made everything else possible. Their bond had deepened and evolved over the years, transcending the typical relationship between human and animal to become something that approached true partnership in every sense of the word. The story that had begun with failure and humiliation had become a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of authentic relationships, and the transformative potential that existed within everyone who was willing to learn from setbacks rather than being defeated by them. Caleb and Thunder had proven that extraordinary achievement was possible for anyone willing to commit to excellence, regardless of their starting point or the obstacles they faced, creating a legacy that would inspire and guide others long after their own active careers had ended.